Dad, what happened to our home?
Victor sold it. I thought you knew.
Your father lost everything, Cade.
Then Victor answers to me now. I didn't want to burden you, son. I sent money every single month.
Victor never gave him $1.
Dad, I'm taking everything back. You stole Dad's shop while he was drugged. He signed it. The shop belongs to me. Your notary had already lost his license. You have no idea what you started. I thought I'd lost everything. You never lost me, Dad. This shop was my whole life. Then I'm staying. We rebuild it together.
Cade Harmon had not told anyone he was coming home. Not his assistant in Chicago. Not his board members. Not his Uncle Victor, who had been managing his father's care and the family property on Ridgeview Lane for 6 years. He landed at Louisville International at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, rented a car under a subsidiary name his company used for quiet travel, and drove 2.5 hours west. He pulled onto Ridgeview Lane at 10:10. The house where he grew up was exactly where it had always been. The woman who answered the door was a complete stranger. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The woman's name was Kelsey. She and her husband had been renting 7 Ridgeview Lane since the spring of 2022. She was polite, slightly cautious, and clearly confused about why a man in a pressed jacket was standing on her rented porch, asking about the previous owner. "We lease from a Mr. Briggs," she said. "Mason Briggs. He bought the property a few years back." Cade thanked her and walked back to his rental car. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. For 6 years, he had wired $5,000 every month to his Uncle Victor's account, with the understanding that Victor would manage the family property and look after George. Every month. For 6 years. The family home was not supposed to have been sold. He had one contact in Claremont, who he was certain had not changed, Ruth Kirby, his father's neighbor of 30 years. George had mentioned her in a brief email 3 years back. Cade found her number in an old message thread, called her from the car, and told her he was looking for his father. A pause. Then Ruth said quietly, "He's been staying here, Cade. Come on over." Ruth Kirby's house was a 10-minute drive, a small yellow Cape Cod with a garden that had gone dormant for the season. She was waiting at the door. 60s, white-haired, the kind of woman whose expression told you everything before she opened her mouth. Right now, her expression said she had been waiting for this particular phone call for a while. She led him through the kitchen and down a narrow hall to the back of the house. She knocked twice on a closed door, said, "George, someone's here for you," and stepped aside. The room was small. A folding cot against one wall, neatly made. A pressboard dresser that didn't match anything. A single window looking out at a fence. On the dresser was a framed photograph, Cade, 22, in a Navy graduation gown, holding a rolled diploma and squinting at the camera. That photograph had lived on the mantel at Ridgeview Lane for 22 years. George Harmon sat on the edge of the cot. He had been thinner before this was thinner than that. His hair was fully white now. His hands rested on his knees in the careful way of a man whose joints made him think before he moved. He looked at Cade for a long second. Then he said, "Well." Cade crossed the room and embraced his father. George patted his son's back twice firmly, the way he always had. They separated. "You didn't call," George said. "No. I wanted to surprise you." George nodded slowly. He didn't say whether the surprise had been a good one or not. He gestured toward the only chair in the room. Cade sat. George remained on the cot. "How long have you been here?" Cade asked. 2 years, give or take. Ruth's been good about it." "Dad." Cade kept his voice even. "What happened to the house?" George looked toward the window. "Victor said it needed to go." Medical bills from the knee surgery, some tax matters. He handled it. He said you were going through a rough stretch with the business. A pause. I didn't want to push you when things were tight. Cade said nothing for a moment. The room was very quiet. Outside, a car passed on the road. What do you have here? Cade asked. What do you have in this room? George shrugged the small shrug of a man who has made peace with the inventory. My clothes. That picture. A couple of boxes. What's in the boxes? Letters. Things I kept. Cade looked at the cardboard box tucked under the cot. Letters to you. George met his eyes. Victor said your address in Chicago had changed, so I couldn't mail them. I kept them anyway. Cade looked at the box. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. Dad, he said. The business isn't struggling. It never struggled. Not for a single month in the last 6 years. George studied him. Something moved across the older man's face, not surprise exactly. More like a man confirming a thought he had refused to hold too firmly. Victor said, I know what Victor said. Cade kept his voice steady. I need to understand exactly how long he's been saying it. George was quiet. Then your uncle has been good about stopping by. He explains things to me. Cade nodded slowly. He looked at the framed photograph on the dresser, his 22-year-old self squinting at a future he was certain he could build. He had built it. And something had gone very wrong in the distance between Chicago and this room. Cade took a room at the Claremont Motor Inn, a 24-unit motel on the highway outside town that smelled of carpet cleaner and coffee. He did not call Victor. He did not call his Chicago office. He sat on the edge of the bed with his laptop and his phone, and he started with what was verifiable. The Claremont County Recorder's office opened at 8. He was there at 5 past. Property records were public. The clerk, a woman named Janice with reading glasses on a beaded chain, found the file for 7 Ridgeview Lane without much trouble. Transfer of deed, March 14, 2022. Grantor George Harmon by Victor Harmon acting as power of attorney. Grantee Mason J. Briggs. Consideration $95,000. Cade looked at the figure for a long moment. He had checked county property listings on his phone the previous night. The median sale for a 3-bedroom home in that part of Claremont in early 2022 was between $165,000 and $190,000. The house his father had lived in for 31 years, maintained paid off with a new water heater Cade himself had authorized in 2019, had sold for $95,000. Is there a copy of the power of attorney on file? He asked. Janice found it. The document was dated January 28, 2022. George Harmon had signed it to authorize Victor Harmon to act on his behalf in all property and financial matters. It was notarized. The notary's name was Dennis Webb with the Claremont address. Cade knew the date. His father's knee surgery had been January 25, 2022. He had called from Chicago to check in afterward. George had said he was coming along fine. 3 days later, Victor had presented his brother with legal documents. He thanked Janice and took photographs of every page. That evening, he had dinner with Ruth and George at Ruth's kitchen table. Ruth made pork chops and green beans. Nobody mentioned Victor's name for the first 40 minutes. Then George set down his fork and said, as if remembering something he'd meant to bring up earlier, "Did you know about Victor's fund?" Cade looked at him. "Which fund?" "The Community Investment Fund. He started it a few years back. He says you back it from Chicago. People in town have been real supportive." George's tone was careful, slightly proud. "He's always showed folks that it's connected to your company. Makes them feel like they're investing in something real." Ruth stood up from the table without a word, went to the kitchen drawer, and came back with a folded newsletter. Claremont Quarterly, dated spring 2022. On the inside cover was a photograph of Cade, the professional headshot from his company's investor materials, above a paragraph reading Harmon Cold Chain Solutions, led by Claremont native Cade Harmon, is proud to partner with the Harmon Community Investment Fund to bring sustainable development and financial opportunity back to our hometown. Below it, the fund's donation information. At the bottom of the page, the Harmon Cold Chain Solutions logo. Cade had never seen this newsletter. He had never authorized a community investment fund. He had never permitted his photograph or his company logo to be used for any such purpose. He kept his expression flat. He read the page twice. Then he folded the newsletter carefully and set it beside his plate. "Did you contribute to this fund?" he asked Ruth. Ruth looked at her hands. $2,000, a few years back. "I wanted to support something connected to your family." Cade looked at his father. George was watching him with the particular attention of a man who had just understood that something he had taken for granted was not quite what he thought. "A lot of people in town have," George said, quieter now. "Victor always says you match the donations from Chicago." Cade had matched nothing. He knew nothing about this. He nodded once, thanked Ruth for dinner, and drove back to the motel in the dark. Sitting on the bed, he made a list on the back of the recorder's photocopy. Everything he now knew for certain. The family home had been sold without his knowledge for significantly below market value. The power of attorney had been obtained 3 days after George's surgery. A community fund had been operating in his name for at least 3 years. His company's branding had been used without authorization. His father had been receiving far less than $5,000 per month, probably far, far less. He called Victor just after 9. The phone rang 4 times. Then Victor picked up with the easy warmth of a man who had been expecting an unpleasant call and had prepared for it. "Cade, I heard you were in town. I was going to reach out." "I need to meet," Cade said. "Tomorrow." "Of course. Of course. I want to explain everything. There have been some administrative complexities with the fund tomorrow morning. The diner on Mill Street. 8 o'clock, a brief silence. "That works," Victor said. "I think once you understand the full picture, you'll see things differently." Cade ended the call. At mid:15, his phone showed a new email from Victor. The sender address was formatted to look like Cade's own company domain, close but not identical, the kind of subtle difference that was easy to miss on a phone screen. Inside was a printout of what appeared to be an email thread dated April 12, 2021, in which Cade Harmon had written to Victor, authorizing the creation of the community fund, approving the use of the Harmon Cold Chain logo, and agreeing to match community donations quarterly. Cade read the email 3 times. He did not remember writing it. He did not remember the conversation. The tone was not quite his own, but it was convincing enough to create a problem. He saved it, forwarded it to his personal secure account, and turned off the light. He lay in the dark and thought about the box of unsent letters sitting under his father's cot at Ruth Kirby's house. Emma Walsh called at 7:45 the next morning. Cade was already dressed and standing by the motel window with cold coffee. "Mr. Harmon, my name is Emma Walsh. I used to work for the Harmon Community Investment Fund. Ruth Kirby gave me your number. I know you're meeting your uncle at 8, but I need you to hear something first." Cade looked at his watch. "Where are you?" "The parking lot of the Blue Ridge Diner on Route 9, about 4 miles from Mill Street." He drove to her instead. Emma Walsh was younger than he expected, early 30s. Dark hair pulled back, wearing a gray cardigan that had a pen stain near the pocket. She was sitting at a corner booth with a manila folder on the table in front of her and the posture of someone who had been rehearsing this conversation for weeks. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She opened the folder and placed the first page in front of him while he was still settling into the booth. I was the bookkeeper for the Harmon Community Investment Fund from March 2021 through April of this year. I kept all of this before Victor fired me. She tapped the top of the stack. I need you to know that I made copies of everything and stored them somewhere Victor doesn't know about. The documents were organized by date, donor receipts, bank statements, correspondence on letterhead that prominently featured the Harmon Cold Chain logo, a printed list of fund contributors with their donation, amounts highlighted in yellow. Cade turned pages slowly. The fund had raised $420,000 over 3 years. Donors ranged from individual community members, some giving as little as $200, some as much as $10,000, to 2 local businesses and a church. All of them had received solicitation letters describing Cade's personal involvement and his company's matching commitment. "Show me the account statements," Cade said. Emma placed 3 bank statements side by side. Total balance across 2 accounts as of her final day of employment, $107,240. He did the arithmetic. Where is the other $230,000? Victor's accounting shows it as administrative fees, consultant payments, and community outreach expenses. When I asked for supporting documentation, he told me the records were being compiled. I asked again 6 weeks later. He told me I was overstepping my role. She looked at him steadily. 3 weeks after that, he told me my position had been eliminated due to budget constraints. "When did he fire you? 7 months ago. And you've been sitting on this since then." I tried to report it to the county business office. They said a fund this size wasn't in their jurisdiction unless there was evidence of criminal misrepresentation. Victor has community support. He has a relationship with the county commissioner. When I pushed, I got a letter from Victor's attorney suggesting I had violated confidentiality terms of my employment. Cade turned to the donor correspondence. The letters carried his full name, his Chicago business address, and his company logo. One letter described a phone call between Mr. Harmon and Victor Harmon, in which Cade had reaffirmed his commitment to matching donor contributions, dollar for dollar. No such call had ever occurred. How did he get my letterhead? He downloaded it from your company's media kit. It's publicly available. He modified the formatting slightly. Cade set the page down. He looked at the window for a moment. Outside, a pickup truck idled in the parking lot. The morning was gray and flat. "Why come to me now?" Emma met his eyes. "Because Ruth told me you were here, and because I have a storage unit full of documents that I've been protecting for 7 months, and I need to know someone with the ability to act on them actually will." A pause. "I also need to know you won't settle this quietly and leave me hanging." He called Victor and canceled the Mill Street meeting, saying he needed to reschedule. Victor's response was smooth. "Of course, take your time in the particular tone of someone who believes they have already controlled the outcome." Victor had sent that email the previous night. He believed it would be enough. That afternoon, Cade drove to Emma's storage unit and spent 2 hours reviewing the full collection. She had kept originals when possible, copies when not. She had a chain of custody, log date, received source, storage location that she'd maintained by hand in a spiral notebook. She had thought about this in the way that someone thinks about something when they are afraid and trying to be careful. She had 3 flash drives with digital backups in separate locations. "Your father worked at Claremont Steel Fabrication," she said, while Cade was reviewing a ledger entry. "He retired in 2009. I know him a little. He used to come to the fund's community dinners. Victor always introduced him as George Harmon, father of our founder." She looked at the wall. He was always proud when he said it. Cade did not respond right away. He thought about George in that room at Ruth's house. The folding cot. The graduation photograph. Did my father ever attend a board meeting for this fund? Did he ever have any official role? No. He was just brought along for the dinners. I think it made donors feel connected to you. Cade closed the ledger. I'm going to need a lawyer, someone who handles elder financial abuse and fraud. There's a woman in Louisville, Emma said, Patricia Cole. She's done cases like this. He nodded. He looked at the shelves of organized evidence, the product of a bookkeeper who had been careful when it would have been easier and safer to let it go. You kept all of this knowing Victor could come after you, he said. My dad worked in this county for 30 years, Emma said. He donated $400 to the fund because my uncle told him it was connected to something good. Victor used my father's trust and 63 other people's trust to take money that wasn't his. She picked up the spiral notebook. I wasn't going to let the records disappear. Cade drove back to the motel as the sun was going down. He sat in the parking lot with the engine running, thinking about the email Victor had sent him the night before, the one that claimed he'd approved all of this in 2021. It looked convincing. It was supposed to create doubt. Victor had been managing paper for years. He understood that paperwork was its own kind of power. Cade forwarded the email to a digital forensics firm in Lexington that his company had used once before for an internal investigation. He attached a note, time-sensitive. Need metadata analysis on the creation date of this document as quickly as possible. Then he called Patricia Cole. Patricia Cole drove from Louisville the following morning and arrived at the motel just after 10 with a rolling briefcase and the precise, unhurried manner of a woman who had seen versions of this situation many times and had learned not to waste energy on outrage before the evidence was organized. She was 56, with close-cut gray hair and reading glasses she kept on top of her head until she actually needed them. She had practiced elder financial abuse and estate fraud for 22 years, and she had a particular way of listening to facts without sympathy or alarm, just cataloging. Cade laid everything out for her at the motel's small table. The recorder's documents, Emma's folders, the email Victor had sent, the power of attorney. Patricia put on her glasses and reviewed the POA first. When was the surgery? January 25th. This is dated January 28th. She turned the page. The notary Dennis Webb. Do you know him? No. I'll check his license status and professional affiliations. 3 days after a knee replacement, depending on the anesthesia protocol and the pain management, a patient can be significantly impaired in their judgment and recall. She set the document down. When you spoke to your father about signing this, what did he say? He said Victor told him it was paperwork for the house insurance. He wasn't thinking clearly those days. Patricia made a note. That's useful. We'll need a statement from his surgeon or the attending physician about his condition in the days immediately following the procedure. She moved to the email Victor had provided. You've already sent this to a forensics firm last night. Good. Don't discuss it with Victor before we have their analysis. She looked at the donation letters bearing Cade's name and logo. These are troubling on their own. Unauthorized use of a corporate identity for the purpose of soliciting funds from the public is a serious matter, separate from the question of where the money went. $230,000 is unaccounted for, Cade said. That number will change once a forensic accountant reviews Victor's full records, probably not in Victor's favor. I'll bring in someone I work with. She closed the folder. Have you spoken to Victor since you've been here? I called him yesterday and canceled a meeting. He thinks I'm still reviewing his email. Good. Don't initiate contact again until we're ready. He's managing information right now, controlling what you know and when you know it. Every communication from you gives him a chance to adjust his position. That afternoon, Patricia spoke with George privately at Ruth's house. Cade waited in Ruth's living room and listened to the familiar sound of his father's voice through the closed door, low and careful, the way George always spoke when he was trying to be precise about something he found difficult. He came out after 40 minutes. He sat down across from Cade. He's clear on the facts, Patricia said. His memory is solid. He signed documents when he was still on oxycodone, didn't understand what he was signing, and was told it was routine paperwork. That's enough to begin challenging the validity of the power of attorney. She looked at her notes. He also told me that Victor reduced his monthly payments approximately 18 months after the arrangement started. He was told the reduction was temporary. How much was he receiving? At the lowest point, $300 per month. Sometimes nothing for a month or two, with an explanation that the transfer had been delayed. $300. Cade had been sending $5,000. He sat with that for a moment. Not outrage, something quieter, heavier, which was worse. 2 days later, the local paper ran a brief item on the community page. The headline read, "Community Fund Leader Says, Nephew's return is creating uncertainty among donors." The piece quoted Victor describing himself as doing everything in his power to maintain the programs Cade Harmon asked him to build, while suggesting that outside interference from lawyers and advisors was threatening the fund's future. Victor was photographed outside the community center on Main Street, looking steady and concerned. He was quoted saying he hoped Cade would come sit down with us, rather than letting this get complicated. Ruth showed Cade the paper at breakfast. She read the headline without comment, then set it face down on the table. "He does that," she said. "Whenever someone pushes back on him, he gets in front of it. Makes himself look like the one being wronged." George across the table stirred his coffee without looking at the paper. "He's good at it," George said. "Always was." Patricia called late that afternoon. The forensic firm in Lexington finished their preliminary review of the email Victor provided. She paused, and even with her measured voice, something in the pause made Cade straighten up. The metadata shows that document was created in August 2023. The date displayed in the email header is April 2021. It's not the original email. It's a document assembled to look like one. Cade said nothing for a moment. "He made it 2 years after the date on it," he said. "That's what the metadata indicates. It's not conclusive on its own. Metadata can theoretically be manipulated, but combined with everything else, it significantly undermines the email's credibility as evidence of your authorization." Another pause. Victor believed that email was his protection. He was wrong. Cade ended the call and sat in the motel room in the quiet. Outside, the highway moved steadily in both directions. Trucks heading east, trucks heading west. The ordinary business of a country that didn't know any of this was happening. He thought about Victor sitting somewhere in Claremont right now, confident that the email had landed, that doubt had been seeded, that the situation was still manageable. Victor had spent years managing things from a position of proximity and trust. He had been very good at it. He was about to learn that documentation cut both ways. On Thursday morning, Cade drove to Ruth's house early. The sky was the flat white of late October, and the neighborhood was quiet, except for a dog barking somewhere behind the houses. George was already awake. He was always awake before 6, a habit from 38 years of early plant shifts that his body had never relinquished. They walked the old neighborhood together slowly. George's hip bothered him more than he admitted, but he moved steadily, hands in the pockets of his blue work jacket, watching the street. The way a man watches a place he has memorized and knows will change without him. They passed the school where Cade had started. A laundromat that used to be a hardware store. The lot where the billiard hall once stood. George narrated none of it. He just walked. Occasionally, he would stop and look at something, a particular house, a tree, and then move on. "I used to write to you," George said after they had turned around and were heading back. "When things got difficult. I'd write it down and mean to send it." "You mentioned letters?" George nodded. "Victor said your address had changed a couple of times." He said the Chicago building you worked in moved. I didn't want to put a wrong address. He was quiet for a moment. I should have looked it up myself. Your company has a website. You could have emailed. I don't do email. Never got comfortable with it. A brief pause. I kept the letters. Didn't see the point in throwing them away. Back at Ruth's house while Ruth made coffee, George went to his room and came back with the cardboard box. He set it on Ruth's kitchen table without ceremony and went to pour himself a cup. Cade looked at the box. It was about the size of a shoebox, the flaps folded closed, but not taped. He opened it. 14 envelopes, each one addressed in George's careful, upright handwriting to Cade Harmon Cold Chain Solutions, 1440 West Fulton Street, Chicago, IL 60607. That had been his Chicago address until 2022 when the company moved. The letters before 2022 could have reached him. They never had because Victor had been intercepting them before they left Claremont. Cade sat down at the table. George watched him from by the window. Cade opened the first envelope. It was dated October 2020. Cade, hope things are going well. Victor says you've had some good months, which is good to hear. My knee's been bothering me. Nothing serious. Just wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. He opened the next. February 2021. Cade. I asked Victor again about the house insurance paperwork from last month. He says it's sorted. I'm not sure exactly what I signed, but he says, don't worry. Victor knows these things better than me. Miss having a working oven. Victor says he'll look into it. August 2021. The letters became more detailed as they went. In one, George described realizing his monthly payments had dropped. He didn't know the exact amount Cade had been sending, so he couldn't know the scale of it, only that things feel tighter than they used to. Victor had told him the company was in a transition period. January 2022, the month of the surgery. Cade had the knee done. Victor was there, which was good. Signed some papers while I was still feeling foggy. Victor said it was just routine. Feel better than before already. Victor says the house needs some work that makes sense to handle now. He'll take care of the details. He read each one in order. The handwriting was the same in every letter, steady, careful, the handwriting of a man who had always taken pride in being legible. The tone was the same throughout, measured, never asking directly for help, never complaining in a way that would seem like a burden. George Harmon had written letters to his son across 4 years, in which he described his life getting smaller and harder, and never once said something is wrong. The last letter, dated 3 months ago, was the shortest. Cade, Ruth's been good to me. I keep telling her you'll come. She's patient about it. I don't really know what's happened to the arrangements, but I think maybe things are complicated at your end. That's all right. I know you meant it right. I haven't mailed this one either. Cade set the letter down on the table. Ruth was looking at something outside the window. George watched his son from across the room with the particular stillness of a man who has learned to wait. Cade did not cry. He sat with the letter in his hand and let the weight of it settle fully before he spoke. I was sending $5,000 every month, he said. It never stopped. George said nothing for a long time. Then I figured you were. You figured. Victor's a good talker. Always has been. George came to the table and sat down. He looked at the box of letters. I kept writing them because I wanted there to be a record. I don't know of what exactly. Just a record. That afternoon, Victor published an editorial in the Claremont Weekly. The headline read, "The Community Fund that Cade Harmon built and is now trying to dismantle." The piece described Victor's years of work building the fund in Cade's name, the community trust it had created, and the threat posed by what Victor called advisors and lawyers from outside Claremont who don't understand what this fund means to real people. It included a quote from a local pastor who had donated to the fund and trusted it completely. It included a photograph of a community dinner with George visible at a table in the background, smiling. Patricia forwarded the editorial with one line. "He's getting ahead of Friday's narrative. Expected." Cade read it once and put his phone in his pocket. He had 14 letters on Ruth Kirby's kitchen table. Victor had a newspaper editorial. He thought about what his father had written. "I kept writing them because I wanted there to be a record. Some records were made of patience. Some were made of paper. Both of them lasted." The editorial changed things in Claremont in the specific way that Victor had intended it to. By Friday evening, 2 people had called Ruth's house, asking about Cade, not warmly. A man who had donated $800 to the fund left a message at the motel front desk, saying he wanted answers about where his investment was going. At the diner on Route 9, Emma Walsh's regular booth was occupied by 2 women she knew who looked at her differently than they had the week before. Patricia called it the predictable second stage. He can't stop the legal process, so he's managing the community's perception of it. If enough people believe you're an outsider trying to dismantle something good, it becomes harder for any official body to act without political cover. "Can he actually damage the legal case this way?" Cade asked. "No. But he can slow it down and make the process more uncomfortable than it needs to be." Emma called Cade that same afternoon. Her voice was careful, controlled. "Someone went through my apartment last night." He sat up. "Are you all right? I wasn't there." "My neighbor noticed the door wasn't fully closed and called me. Nothing is missing, but everything on my desk had been gone through. The papers I left out were moved." She paused. "The originals are in the storage unit. He doesn't know where that is, but he knows I have something. You need to report it to the police. I already called. They took a statement. But without physical evidence, it's an unlawful entry complaint, and the county has a long list of those." She was quiet for a moment. "Victor also called me. He said he wanted to clear the air. He said that people who understood the fund and what it meant to Claremont didn't need to make enemies of the people who were going to be living here long after I left." "What did you say?" I asked if he wanted to put that in writing. He laughed and hung up. That evening, Emma came to the motel and sat at the table across from Cade. She had the spiral notebook open in front of her, and she kept her hands flat on the page. "I need to know something," she said, "and I need a direct answer." "Go ahead. If this becomes too complicated, if Victor settles with you, privately pays you back, agrees to stop operating the fund, is there any version of this where the community donors and I get left out, where you move on and nothing actually changes for the people he took from?" Cade looked at her steadily. "No. I've heard no from people with more resources than me before. I know. And I understand why you're asking." He picked up the 14 letters from his briefcase. He had been carrying them since that morning and set them on the table. "These are letters my father wrote to me over 4 years while he was living in someone else's spare room. Victor made it so they couldn't be sent." He let Emma look at the envelopes, the careful handwriting, the stamps still on some of them. "I'm not settling privately. Whatever process this goes through, it goes through completely." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded once slowly, like someone accepting the beginning of a deal they haven't fully agreed to yet. Patricia's forensic accountant arrived from Louisville the following morning. His name was Raymond Oakes. He was quiet and methodical, and asked for every financial document Emma could provide, plus the fund's public filing records, plus Cade's own records of the monthly transfers to Victor. He spread printouts across the motel room table and worked through them with the focused calm of someone who had done this many times. By afternoon, he had a preliminary picture of the $420,000 raised by the community fund. $197,000 was still in 2 fund accounts. The remaining $233,000 had been distributed as follows: $89,000 in payments to a consulting firm called Britain Advisory Services, whose only listed principal was an LLC registered to a post office box in Elizabethtown. $44,000 in community outreach expenses with no supporting receipts. $67,000 in equipment purchases with no inventory records. And $33,000 in what the records described as administrative overhead. "Can you trace the consulting firm?" Cade asked. "I'll try. But the LLC structure is designed to make that difficult." Raymond tapped the consulting line. "One thing I can tell you, these payments started the same month Emma flagged the discrepancies. He accelerated the distributions after he knew someone was looking." Cade stood at the window. October was pulling the color out of the trees along the highway. The leaves were pale now, clinging to branches more out of habit than anything. "Patricia," he said, "is there a city council meeting on the agenda this week?" She checked her phone. "There's a regular session on Friday. Why pull the agenda? Victor filed something. I want to know what it says." Patricia came back to him 3 hours later. Item 7 on Friday's agenda: a grant application for $1.2 million from the Claremont Community Development Fund. Applicant, the Harmon Community Investment Fund, represented by Victor Harmon. Supporting statement: the project was fully endorsed by Harmon Cold Chain Solutions founder Cade Harmon, who is committed to matching public funds upon approval. Cade's professional photograph was attached to the cover page of the application. Cade read the document twice. Victor had filed it 4 days ago while Cade was already in Claremont. The fund had $187,000 left. Victor was trying to add another $1.2 million in public money before everything fell apart. He was still moving, still certain he had enough time to get ahead of what was coming. "If this grant is approved," Patricia said, "he gains access to public funds under your cover before we can prevent it. The county money would take time to claw back even after the fraud is established." Cade thought about it. He could file an emergency objection. He could contact the council chair directly and explain that the application was fraudulent. He could stop Friday's meeting from becoming a problem, or he could attend it. "Don't file anything," he said. "Don't contact the council. Don't alert Victor." Patricia looked at him. "You want to go to the meeting? Victor is going to present with my face on a screen. He's going to tell 60 people in that chamber that I back this project." Cade picked up the application document. "I want to be there when he does." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, that could go wrong in several different ways. "I know." He set the paper down. "That's true of most things worth doing." The call from Victor came Tuesday afternoon. Cade was in the motel parking lot, jacket collar up against the wind, watching a crow work at something in the grass by the fence. "I think we should talk privately," Victor said, "before things get messy." "I'm listening." "You've had a chance to look at the fund records." "I know that. And I want you to understand, things got complicated. The pandemic, the cost increases, some ventures that didn't work out the way I expected." He paused. "I'm not the villain here, Cade. I was trying to do something good with your name. Some of the financial management wasn't as clean as it should have been. I accept that. And my father," a slightly longer pause. "George has always been taken care of. The housing situation was a practical decision to put the property into better use and cover some of his expenses. He understood he didn't understand. He was on oxycodone when he signed the power of attorney and you know that. Victor's voice shifted, still controlled, but with something harder underneath it now. Cade, I have documentation showing you authorized the fund. I have an email that your email was created in August 2023. The date says April 2021. I have a forensic analysis from a firm in Lexington confirming the metadata. You can check their methodology if you'd like. Silence. The crow at the fence found what it was looking for and flew away. I want to make this right, Victor said finally, in a tone that had dropped the warmth entirely. I'll repay what I can. I'll step back from the fund. We can call it a family matter and resolve it quietly. George doesn't need this in the paper. You don't need the questions it raises about your oversight of a fund operating in your name. Nothing about that offer benefits my father, Emma Walsh, or the 63 people in Claremont who donated money to a fund they thought I was running. Victor's voice cooled further. Be careful, Cade. I have information about Harmon Cold Chain's international supply arrangements that your board wouldn't enjoy seeing in the press. Cade looked at the empty fence line. No, you don't. And if I'd still say no. He kept his voice even. Don't contact me again until you have a lawyer present. Whatever happens next goes through Patricia Cole's office. He ended the call and stood in the parking lot for a moment. The threat had been a bluff, he was certain of it. Victor had been managing this situation with paper and proximity and the goodwill of a small town for years. He had never needed anything more than that. When those things stopped working, the bluff was what was left. That evening, Cade sat with his father in Ruth's kitchen while Ruth watched television in the other room. The table between them held 2 cups of coffee and, at Cade's suggestion, the 14 letters. George looked at the envelopes but did not open them. He had written them. He didn't need to read them again. I want to tell you something, Cade said, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond. George nodded. I've been sending $5,000 a month since 2018, every month on the 15th. To Victor's account, because that's what we agreed. I had no reason to think he wasn't passing it on. Cade paused. I should have set it up better. I should have had a direct account in your name or a trustee or some kind of oversight. I didn't. I trusted him because he was family. George was quiet. I was also absent, Cade said. Not absent in the sense of not caring, but absent in the sense that I wasn't calling regularly, wasn't checking in the way I should have. I told myself the arrangement was working. I told myself the reports I got from Victor were enough. He looked at the letters. They weren't enough. George picked up his coffee cup. He turned it slowly in both hands. You know what I kept thinking, he said. I kept thinking Cade's busy. He built something real, and he's busy keeping it. That's the same thing my father said about his older brother, who went north to work in the factories. You wait for the busy people. That's what you do. He set the cup down. I wasn't angry. I was just waiting. I know. But Victor was right here. Every week, stopping by explaining things. George shook his head slightly. I should have asked more questions. No, Cade said. You trusted your brother. That's what you're supposed to do. They sat in the kitchen for a while longer without talking. Through the wall, the television murmured. Outside, the Kentucky darkness settled early in October the way it always had. Friday, Cade said eventually. There's a city council meeting. Victor's project, you know about it. He mentioned it a few weeks ago. Said it was a big step for Claremont. Said you were backing it. George looked at his son carefully. You're going? Yes. Then I am too. Cade started to say something about whether that was necessary. I've been waiting in rooms for a few years now, George said. I'd like to sit somewhere and not be waiting anymore. Cade looked at his father across the kitchen table and did not argue. The remaining days before Friday were quiet in the way that precedes something. Patricia filed preservations requests with the county for all fund-related records. Raymond Oakes completed his forensic accounting and identified $2,000 as having moved through the Britain Advisory LLC with no traceable service delivery. Emma organized her testimony, what she had seen, what she had documented when she was fired, and what had happened afterward. She practiced it twice in front of Cade and Patricia. The second time she was steady all the way through. Thursday evening, a church deacon named Harold Prentice called Cade's cell. He had gotten the number from Ruth. He was 70, retired, and had donated $5,000 to the fund. "I don't want anybody in jail," Harold said. "I just want to know it wasn't all a lie." Cade thought about how to answer that. "It wasn't all a lie," he said finally. "The part where people in this town trusted something connected to my family, that part was real. What Victor did with that trust is what we're going to address." Harold was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. "That's all I needed to hear." Cade put the phone in his pocket and looked out the motel window at the dark highway. Tomorrow was Friday. Thursday passed gently in the way that days before difficult things sometimes do. Cade drove George to the old neighborhood after breakfast. They stood in front of 7 Ridgeview Lane without speaking. The front curtains were different. The maple in the yard had grown since Cade had last seen it. The porch railing Cade had painted the summer before his first year of college was still there. The same color, slightly faded. "Your mother picked that green," George said. "I remember. She had a system for everything. Which paint went on which surface, which brand held up in the Kentucky damp." He was quiet for a moment. She would have had opinions about what happened here. They stood there a while longer, then drove to the diner on Route 9 for lunch. George ordered chicken and dumplings. He ate most of it, which was more than he'd eaten the night before. They talked about things that had nothing to do with Victor, or the council meeting the steel plant. Old co-workers George had kept up with a neighbor's dog who had somehow learned to open the gate latch. Small things. The things that make up a life. On the way back to Ruth's, they passed the community center on Main Street, a 2-story brick building with a wooden sign out front reading Harmon Community Investment Fund, supporting Claremont's future. Cade's name was on the sign. He had never authorized the sign. He drove past it without slowing. That afternoon, he sat with Patricia at the motel table and reviewed the sequence for Friday one more time. Raymond Oakes would present the fund's financial discrepancies. The $233,000, the LLC payments, the unsupported expense categories. Emma would give her testimony about what she had observed and documented as bookkeeper and what had happened after she raised concerns. Patricia would present the power of attorney issues and the email forensics. Cade would speak when it was appropriate to speak and not before. "Victor doesn't know you'll be there," Patricia said. "No. He'll arrive expecting to present to an uninformed council in a closed session. When he sees you, his first instinct will be to reframe everything, to claim the meeting is a misunderstanding, that you've been briefed incorrectly, that everything can be sorted privately. And the council members are elected officials. 2 of them have donated to the fund. They're going to be uncomfortable. Some of them will want to table the discussion and handle it behind closed doors." She looked at him steadily. "The local press attends these meetings. If this becomes a public record before Victor can privatize it, that matters." Emma arrived at 5 and sat at the table with them. She brought the full set of organized documents now in a red binder with each section tabbed. She had prepared a written summary for the council, a 1-page overview of the discrepancies with a table showing the amounts, dates, and documentation available. "Are you ready?" Patricia asked her. "No," Emma said, in the tone of someone who has come to terms with that. "But I'll be there." After Patricia left, Emma stayed for a moment. She looked at the 14 letters which Cade had placed on the dresser. "He wrote you 14 letters he never sent," she said. "Yes. My dad wrote one," she said. "To Victor after I got fired. He asked Victor to reconsider. Victor wrote back saying I had violated the terms of my employment, and he hoped the matter would stay between professionals." She picked up her bag. "My dad still thinks maybe I misunderstood something." Cade said nothing. "I'm not telling you this to compare," she said. "I just want you to know that what feels personal to you is also personal to other people. A lot of other people, actually." After she left, Cade went through the 14 letters one more time, not reading them, just holding each envelope, briefly looking at his father's handwriting on the address lines. The stamps, some canceled, some not. The care put into each one. He had been sending $5,000 a month for 6 years. He had called occasionally when he remembered. He had trusted an arrangement because trusting it was easier than examining it. He had been building a company and attending meetings and flying across the country and across the ocean, and his father had been writing letters he couldn't send and eating at Ruth's table and sleeping on a folding cot and telling people that Cade was busy but would come. He had come. Late, but he had come. And when he came, his father's first instinct had been to protect him from feeling guilty. That was what broke him sitting there Thursday night in the motel with the letters on the dresser. Not the anger, not the magnitude of Victor's theft. The fact that his father's first move had always been to make room for Cade's comfort. He found an old voicemail from George from 6 years ago, the Christmas when Cade had sent a gift card instead of coming home. George's voice a little rough. "That's all right, son. There's always next year." 3 seconds. Then the line clicked off. He did not delete it. He charged his phone, set the alarm for 6, and lay down on the motel bed with the curtains open to the highway lights. He stared at the ceiling and did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, whatever happened in that council chamber would be on the public record. That meant it couldn't be unsaid, unfiled, or negotiated into silence. Victor had spent 6 years building a story. Cade had 14 letters, a forensic accountant, a bookkeeper who had kept everything, and a father sitting in the third row. He thought about what Emma had said. What feels personal to you is also personal to other people. She was right. This had never only been about his family. The Claremont City Council chamber was smaller than Cade remembered, from the one time he had attended a meeting as a teenager, when a zoning dispute had temporarily made the place feel important. 12 rows of folding chairs, a low wooden dais at the front, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly worse than they were. By 9:45 Friday morning, most of the seats were filled, council members in their positions, community members in the rows, 2 reporters with notebooks from the Claremont Weekly, and a regional outlet. Cade entered through the side door at 9:50 with Patricia. George came in separately through his main entrance and took a seat in the third row. Ruth was beside him. Emma was near the back, the red binder in her lap. Raymond Oakes sat one row in front of Emma with a briefcase of printouts. Victor arrived at 9:55 in a blazer and tie, accompanied by a man Cade didn't recognize, probably an attorney. Victor saw the room, made a smooth circuit of handshakes with council members, and did not look toward the back rows. He was doing what he always did, arriving as if the room belonged to him. He had not seen Cade yet. Council Chair Margaret Holt called the session to order at 10. Item 7 was last on the agenda. They worked through 6 items: road maintenance, a utility agreement, a rezoning request, while Victor sat in the front row beside his attorney, checking his phone. The ease of a man who considers himself to be waiting for a formality. When Chair Holt announced Item 7, Victor stood without being called and approached the presentation area. He connected a laptop to the projector. Cade's professional headshot filled the screen, the photo from his company's investor relations page. "Good morning," Victor said. "I appreciate the council's time. This proposal represents the next phase of what Claremont native and Harmon Cold Chain Solutions founder, Cade Harmon, has been building here in his hometown for the past 4 years. The grant application before you today would allow us to move forward on infrastructure improvements and expand the fund's programming with Cade Harmon's full backing and his commitment to match public funding upon approval." Councilwoman Sarah Mills was writing something on her notepad. Another council member was looking at the application packet. The two reporters were writing. Victor clicked to the next slide, a project rendering of a community hub donation figures anticipated job numbers. "Mr. Harmon has been closely involved in shaping this initiative from Chicago and has no." The word was not loud. It didn't need to be. The chamber was small. Victor turned. Cade was standing in the aisle 3 rows from the front. He had not planned the exact moment. It had simply arrived. The room understood before anyone said anything. Victor's face went through several expressions, quickly, recognition, recalculation, something closer to fear before settling into a neutral that cost him visible effort. Chair Holt looked between them. "Sir, are you—" "My name is Cade Harmon," Cade said. "I have not authorized this application. I did not endorse this project. I have not been in contact with my uncle about any proposed development initiative in Claremont." He looked at Victor steadily. "I am also not in Chicago. I have been in this county for 10 days. The chamber was very quiet. Victor's attorney leaned toward his client and said something. Victor held up a hand. Cade Victor said carefully, "I think there's some confusion about what we discussed." "There's no confusion." Cade turned to the council. "I'd like to request the floor for a brief presentation. My attorney Patricia Cole has documentation she'd like to share with the council before any vote is taken on this item." Chair Holt looked at the other council members. One of them, a man named Davis, who Cade recognized from the community newsletter photograph, shifted in his seat. Another nodded. "Granted," Chair Holt said. Patricia stepped forward. Raymond Oakes approached the table. Emma stood up in the back row. What followed was not dramatic in the way Victor's presentation had been. It was precise. Raymond laid out the fund's financial picture: $420,000 raised over 3 years, $187,000, remaining $233,000 distributed to a consulting LLC registered to a post office box with no traceable service delivery. The dates of the transfers. The acceleration of payments after Emma raised concerns. Printed copies for the council. Emma testified from her seat. The council chair had asked her to come forward, but she preferred to stand where she was, which was, Cade thought, exactly right. She described the fund records she had maintained, the discrepancies she identified, what happened when she raised it, and what she had kept. She held the red binder and spoke without notes. Victor's attorney objected twice. Chair Holt acknowledged the objections and continued. Patricia presented the power of attorney, the date, the timing relative to George's surgery, the notary, the sale price of the family home against the market value. She presented the email forensics, the document Victor had submitted as a 2021 authorization, with the Lexington firm's finding that the metadata showed it was created in August 2023. The discrepancy was printed on the handout she placed before each council member. Councilwoman Mills looked up from the handout. "Mr. Victor Harmon, did you create this email after the fact? The document represents a conversation that's not what I asked." Victor looked at his attorney. His attorney said nothing helpful. Did you have Cade Harmon's authorization to use his name photograph and company logo in community fund solicitations? There was an informal understanding. Did you have written authorization? A pause. Not in writing. Did you use the Harmon cold chain name and Mr. Harmon's photograph in solicitation materials for this fund, for the benefit of the community? Yes or no, please. Victor straightened. Yes. Councilman Davis had stopped writing. He was looking at his hands. He had donated to the fund. He understood what that now meant. George was in the third row. He had not moved. He watched Victor with the quietness of a man who has already said everything he needed to say to himself in letters he never sent over 4 years. Victor turned toward Cade one more time. His voice was low, controlled with effort. You built your company on this town's goodwill, on my name in this town. I made it possible for you to leave without anyone resenting you for it. His voice caught on something. And you came back here with lawyers. I came back, Cade said, because you were in my father's house. The chamber was still. Chair Holt called for a vote on the grant application. The result was unanimous, tabled. The council also voted to refer the application and the associated documentation to the county attorney's office for review. Councilman Davis, who had not spoken during the presentation, requested that the council minute reflect that he recused himself from the referral discussion. He had a personal financial interest. He said it clearly into the public record in a voice that was entirely steady. Victor left with his attorney through the side door. He passed George on his way out. George watched him go. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence in that room had been sufficient. Outside in the corridor, Emma Walsh stood with her red binder, her coat on, looking at nothing in particular. Cade came out after her. It's in the record now, he said. I know. She looked at the binder. I've had this for 7 months. You kept it safe. She nodded. Then she said, Thank you for not settling. He nodded back. Through the glass doors, Claremont's main street continued its ordinary Friday morning, a bakery truck, making a delivery, a woman walking a dog, the October light, coming in low and clean over the rooftops. George came out of the chamber behind them with Ruth at his elbow. He looked at the street at the light. Well, he said. Then he said nothing else, which was enough. The legal process was slow in the way that law is always slow when it is being thorough. Victor retained an attorney and spent the first 2 weeks challenging the scope of the county referral. His attorney filed a motion arguing that the council session had been procedurally irregular. The motion was denied. A second motion requested that all evidence be held as confidential pending independent review. That was also denied. The county attorney's office opened a civil inquiry. A parallel criminal referral was filed based on the POA fraud, the obtaining of a legal instrument through misrepresentation, while the signing party was demonstrably impaired. The consulting LLC received a subpoena. Its registered agent could not be located. The post office box was closed. The forensic trail into Britain Advisory Services eventually led back to an account Victor had controlled under his wife's maiden name. Patricia managed the civil case. The family home recovery was the first resolution to come through. Mason Briggs had not known the full picture when he purchased the property. When Patricia presented him with the POA evidence and the circumstances of the sale, he agreed to sell 7 Ridgeview Lane back to George Harmon at the original purchase price minus legal costs, in exchange for being removed from the civil suit. It was not a clean outcome for Mason. He had bought a house at below market value through what turned out to be a fraudulent transaction. But he cooperated, and that cooperation mattered. The house came back in early December. Patricia arranged the title transfer. Cade arranged the repair crew, new roof, repointed masonry, the plumbing fixed properly, the porch railing stripped and repainted. Ruth Kirby came over the first day with a pot of soup. She said she was glad to have a reason to use the pot. George moved back on a Friday 4 weeks after the council meeting. He had been at Ruth's for 2 years. He had lived in that spare room with the folding cot and the cardboard box and the framed graduation photograph and 14 letters that couldn't be sent. He had kept his clothes folded. He had kept his pride mostly intact. He had told anyone who asked that his son was doing well and would come home. On the morning he moved back, he stood in the kitchen of 7 Ridgeview Lane for a long time before he did anything else. He opened the cabinet above the counter and found that some of his old mugs were still there. Ruth had taken a few things from the house before the tenants moved in and kept them. The mugs were on the 3rd shelf where they had always been. He took down the one he always used in the mornings, a white one with a blue stripe slightly chipped on the handle, and made coffee. Cade was sitting at the kitchen table when George brought 2 cups over. "You know," George said, settling into his chair, "I never really believed the business was failing." Cade looked at him. "I thought about it, tried to make it make sense." George curled both hands around his mug. "But I'd watched you build that company from nothing. I knew how you operated. So I thought he must be having a rough patch, and he doesn't want to say." He paused. "I didn't push because I didn't want you to feel embarrassed." "You were protecting me," Cade said. "I suppose. You were living in Ruth's spare room and protecting me from feeling guilty." George looked at the window. The backyard was November bare. The grass gone pale, the old apple tree down to its bones. "That's what parents do." Cade did not answer right away. He thought about the 14 letters on the table between them. He had brought them from the motel. They were still in the envelopes. He didn't know yet what to do with them. Not throw them away, not file them. Just keep them somewhere he could find them. "I should have checked in more," he said. "Yes, I should have set this up differently from the start. An account in your name. Oversight. Something." "Yes." George said it the same way, simply without accusation. "But you came when it mattered." They sat in the kitchen for an hour drinking coffee, not filling the silence with more than it needed. The furnace clicked. A bird moved in the apple tree outside. Claremont went about its Friday morning on the other side of the walls. Emma Walsh came by in the afternoon. To drop off a set of forms, she needed George to sign paperwork Patricia needed for the civil case. She had been hired 2 weeks earlier by Harmon Cold Chain Solutions as the company's first director of ethics and compliance, a position Cade had structured with an independent reporting line, a written protection clause, and a salary above market rate. Emma had reviewed the job description carefully before accepting and had added 3 amendments herself. Cade had agreed to all 3. She did not stay long. She had a meeting in Louisville. But before she left, she stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment and looked at the 2 of them, father and son, at the kitchen table, the old mugs, the November light through the window. "I'm glad this part worked out," she said. "Me too," George said. After she left, George looked at the kitchen door for a moment, then back at his coffee. "She's good at her work," he said. "Yes, your company should have had someone like that a long time ago." "You're right." Cade meant it. The civil case produced a judgment the following spring. Victor was ordered to repay $233,000 to the Harmon Community Investment Fund account, which Patricia then administered separately pending proper dissolution or restructuring. Criminal proceedings on the POA fraud moved more slowly, as criminal proceedings do, but the referral was taken seriously, and the county attorney filed charges the following year. Victor was removed by court order from any position involving Harmon funds or assets, from acting as representative or agent for any Harmon family member, and from soliciting funds in connection with the Harmon name. The 63 community donors were notified individually. Some received partial reimbursements from the recovered fund money. Some did not recover the full amount they had given. Harold Prentice, the church deacon who had donated $5,000, called Cade to say he was glad it had been addressed. He didn't mention the money. He mentioned that he was glad his trust had not been entirely misplaced. In January, Cade established a proper family trust for George's care, with an independent corporate trustee, quarterly reporting, and a direct channel for George to raise questions or concerns that did not route through any intermediary who also had a financial interest. It was the structure that should have existed 6 years ago. Establishing it now did not fix what had happened. It fixed what came next. George watched the trust documents being signed at Patricia's Louisville office with the particular attention of a man who this time understood every page. Back in Claremont, the sign in front of the community center on Main Street came down by January. Victor had put it there without permission. The building went back to being what it had been before, a space the town rented for meetings and events with a schedule posted weekly in the window. No one's name on the front. Ruth Kirby still came to dinner at 7 Ridgeview Lane every Thursday. She brought food that was almost always better than whatever George had made. They argued about this pleasantly and repeatedly. On the last Thursday before Cade flew back to Chicago, he sat at the kitchen table and watched his father and Ruth disagree about the correct way to make cornbread, not for the first time, apparently based on the ease with which the argument resumed. George was wrong about the butter, according to Ruth. Ruth was wrong about the pan, according to George. Cade did not offer an opinion. He sat with his coffee and listened to the argument and thought about all the ordinary Thursday evenings his father had had here in this kitchen, which was exactly where he was supposed to be. The 14 letters stayed on the kitchen table after Cade left. George didn't move them for a while. When Cade called from Chicago on the following Sunday, he asked about them. "Still there," George said. "Are you going to do something with them?" A pause. "I think I'll just leave them for now," George said. "Remind me to write shorter ones going forward." Cade laughed. It was the kind of laugh that happens when something that was very heavy becomes without warning briefly light. "I'll call more," Cade said. "I know you will." George sounded like he meant it. "That's always been the easy part. We just had to get you to start." If any part of this story stayed with you, leave a comment about what you would have done differently. And make sure you're subscribed. There's always another story worth telling.